The hallway echoed with noise, but he moved through it like a ghost. Lockers slammed. Laughter erupted. Sneakers squeaked against polished floors. But none of it pierced the glass dome he'd built inside his mind. He wasn't escaping. He was refining, reviewing the airflow model in his head, rechecking torque estimates, imagining the resistance calculations he'd scribbled over 100 napkins and coffee receipts. He didn't fit into the chaos. Never had. His hoodie was always the wrong brand. His hair too unbothered. His jeans a little too short from years of growth without funds to keep up. But none of that mattered at his desk, because that's where the real world lived. Not this hallway, not these lockers, but the problem and the solution. He'd first seen the flaw in a fan motor while cleaning out his uncle's broken air purifier. The blades were inefficient, the rotation uneven. A minuscule shift in alignment created friction that went unnoticed by manufacturers, but not by him. He'd run the numbers once, then again, then for a year. He was 16. He took apart donated devices in his garage at night, scavenged copper wire from broken printers, repurposed parts from microwave turntables. He learned how to wind coils by hand, how to balance blades, how to sketch better in silence than most spoke aloud. He failed more times than he could count. Not in tests, in trust. Teachers overlooked him. Peers dismissed him. Family smiled politely but never asked what he was building. They all thought he was lost. But he wasn't lost. He was committed. The only place that felt right was the patent office portal. He'd been checking it every morning for 3 months, logging in quietly on his cracked tablet, holding his breath each time. The form had been long. The fees scraped together, the language unfamiliar, but he'd done it all, submitted every drawing, every notation, every theoretical efficiency gained down to the decimal. And then, one cold morning in October, just before sunrise, the screen blinked. Patent approved. Application number 702-619-4832. Inventor A. Ruiz. Technology class. Small-scale motorized air circulator, enhanced rotation efficiency. He didn't tell anyone. Not right away. Not because he was scared. Because he wanted the moment to live in silence for just a few more minutes, before the world tried to crush it. Later that same day, in the science building's west stairwell, someone shoved his sketch binder from his hands. Pages fluttered across the floor like leaves. They laughed. "Stop daydreaming, loser." He crouched down, slowly gathering the pages. One diagram showed a small fan with modified magnet alignments. Another detailed torque versus RPM gains. Another, the final one, was stamped in blue. USPTO approved. He looked up once. Not with anger, not with shame, but with clarity, because they didn't realize what they were stepping on. They were too busy laughing. He was too busy inventing. He didn't try to get revenge. Didn't post the patent approval online. Didn't print it out and tape it to the classroom door. He wasn't interested in convincing anyone. That wasn't the point. The point was that he had built something real, something functional, something tested not by opinions but by results. While others competed for likes, for locker space, for fleeting clout, he was refining prototypes in silence. He worked in an unfinished shed behind his grandmother's house. There was no insulation, no Wi-Fi, no heater. Just a folding table, a lamp with a frayed cord, and an old fan blade mounted to a hacked-together rig made of spare wood and plastic parts from discarded toys. This was his lab. And in this lab, the air moved differently. The motor he'd designed didn't just rotate, it rotated better, smoother, quieter, more efficiently. Where other fans burned out, his design adapted. It was something small, unglamorous, but revolutionary, because revolution in engineering doesn't come with flash. It comes with friction solved. After school, he worked at a gas station. He didn't wear a name tag, didn't talk much, but in the break room, taped behind his locker, was a printout of the approval email. Just for him. Just to remind himself that even though he was mopping floors and cleaning coffee spills, he'd done something the world couldn't take from him. He'd invented. Legally. Officially. Irrevocably. One night, after a 12-hour shift, he got an email from a small appliance company. They had seen the public filing. They wanted to talk. He almost didn't reply. Not because he wasn't ready, because he didn't believe it was real. But it was. The meeting was scheduled over video. He wore the same hoodie, the same silence. Behind him, on the cracked wall of his shed, were rows of sketches pinned with rusted tacks. They asked him if he'd be willing to demonstrate the fan. He pointed his webcam at the rig, powered it on. The blade spun without a sound. The executives leaned closer. The numbers he read aloud made them go still. They asked him how he built it. He said he didn't build it for them. He built it because it worked. By the end of the week, the company offered to license the design. No investors, no middlemen, just his name on the agreement. He didn't celebrate. He took the first royalty check and bought a soldering station. Then paid 3 months' rent in advance for his grandmother. School, nothing changed. He still sat in the back. Still wore the same hoodie. Still got bumped in the hallway. But when he passed by the science classroom door and glanced through the small window, he saw something. The teacher, who had never once asked about his designs, was holding up a printed copy of his patent during a lecture about innovation. His name was visible on the page. So was the title. And for the first time, students who had never once looked at him began whispering. Not mocking, wondering. He kept walking, because daydreaming was never the problem. The problem was that none of them had ever seen what a real dream looked like once it became reality. The whispers followed him now. Not taunts, not jeers, not the usual loser slung like a reflex, but curiosity. They didn't ask questions to his face, at least not yet. They just started looking longer, lingering at their lockers a second too long when he walked by, watching him in class, eyes drifting from the board to the back row where he sat with his head down, still doodling diagrams in the margins of his math workbook. For the first time, his presence made people uncomfortable in a new way, not because he was strange, but because he was unpredictable. He didn't match the story they had told about him, and that story was breaking. His phone buzzed again. Another email, this one from a university lab on the East Coast. They'd seen his patent through the open database. They were experimenting with sustainable HVAC systems for underfunded schools. His motor's energy profile, small, cheap, and consistent, had caught the attention of their engineering lead. They wanted to replicate the results. Asked if he could provide a working prototype and raw measurements. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he biked home, locked himself in the shed, and spent 3 straight nights rebuilding his model with better materials. He borrowed a laser tachometer from a local college student he met in an online forum, just to validate his numbers. He filmed the test himself. No music, no voiceover, just hands, motion, precision, and at the end, a piece of paper held up to the lens with one word, confirmed. He sent the file, then went to sleep. 2 weeks later, they sent a reply. Not only had they replicated his results, his design had outperformed existing models in both energy efficiency and mechanical durability. They invited him to speak. He declined, not from fear, from focus. He wasn't ready to explain it yet. He wasn't finished. Meanwhile, his classmates started noticing something else. Their teacher now referenced his patent in lessons. Articles began circulating through the school's science club. A local news story titled, "Teen's Design Could Transform Home Cooling Tech," started gaining traction. But still, he said nothing. Not during lunch. Not in the hallway. Not when the same kids who shoved him months earlier now bumped him softly with questions masked as compliments. "Yo, man, I heard about that fan thing. That's crazy." He just nodded and kept walking, because the praise wasn't his destination. The blueprint was. His second design came quietly. He didn't tell the licensing company. Didn't tell his school. It wasn't another fan. It was a motor for small kinetic harvesters, devices that could charge phones through ambient human motion. He'd sketched the concept years ago in a notebook, thinking it was impossible. Now it wasn't. His hands were steadier. His confidence sharper. The dream, once blurry, now had shape. And the shape was scalable. He filed again. This time with fewer mistakes. The form felt familiar. The approval came faster. Patent number 2. And this time? He smiled. Not because anyone called him a genius, but because the version of him they thought was daydreaming was always just designing. The second patent changed the shape of everything even though he said nothing. He still walked with his head down. Still wore the same hoodie, now soft from years of wear. Still slipped out the back of class before people remembered to include him. But the world had already started reconfiguring around him, like orbit adjusting to a new gravitational force. The teacher who once passed over him during presentations now made eye contact. Slowly, uneasily, not with warmth but with caution, like someone realizing they'd misread the blueprint. His name wasn't just whispered anymore. It was searched, posted, shared. The second device, the kinetic harvester, made it to an engineering blog, then to a subreddit, then to a short segment on local news where they pronounced his name wrong but called him a visionary in the making. He watched it once, then muted the clip. Because recognition didn't matter. Precision did. He started staying later in the workshop. What had once been a shed behind his grandmother's house was now reinforced with scrap insulation, a salvage desk, and a proper soldering station. He used the licensing money to buy actual tools. A bench drill, a used oscilloscope, reels of copper wire, circuit boards. Everything was documented. Not for show. For submission. Because he was already thinking of patent number 3. Not a motor. Not a harvester. A control chip. Ultra-low energy adaptive output. Something small enough to hide inside the casing of other devices but powerful enough to change how they interacted with motion and temperature. He didn't know it then, but it would be the one that turned calls into offers. At school, things shifted. He got invited first to the science club, then to classrooms, then to after-school panels hosted by people who once couldn't pronounce his last name. Some of the same kids who called him loser now asked him for help with their robotics builds. He helped quietly. Gave them the answers they weren't ready to find alone. Never corrected them when they acted like they came up with the solutions themselves. Because he didn't need credit. He needed momentum. On the day the chip's patent came through, he printed it and pinned it to the back wall of his shed. 3 patents. 3 numbers. 3 proofs that the world made space for minds it used to dismiss. He didn't celebrate. Just turned off the light. And walked back inside. That same week, a recruiter from a tech incubator in New York emailed. They had seen all 3 filings. Had done the math. Understood what the designs could do if applied across existing infrastructure. The recruiter said they had venture interest. Said there were labs waiting. Said they could fly him out first class. He declined. Asked for a video call instead. He wasn't ready to fly. Not because he couldn't. Because the ground still needed building. He hadn't finished his 4th design. The call happened quietly at midnight. A dark shed. A cold monitor. A boy in a hoodie sitting straight-backed, delivering his pitch with none of the polish of a CEO but all the clarity of an engineer who lived inside the thing he was building. They didn't interrupt him. Didn't laugh. Didn't ask him to dream smaller. They asked when he could start. He told them the truth. I already have. The first time he walked into a building with his name on the security list. He didn't smile. Didn't snap a photo. Didn't call anyone to say, I made it. Because he hadn't made anything yet, only opened a door. And doors meant nothing to him unless they led somewhere worth going. The tech incubator was everything his shed wasn't. Polished floors, touchscreen walls, espresso machines that knew your name. He moved through it like he was still invisible until people began noticing what he carried in his hands. Blueprints. Not slideshows. Not decks. Not startup theater. Schematics. Hand-drawn. Ink-smudged. Annotated down to the decimal. His 4th design was more ambitious than the others, a microcontroller designed to network with environmental inputs in real time. It could be embedded in anything: sneakers, fans, traffic sensors, and make them learn. Learn from air pressure. From friction. From fatigue. He wasn't building devices anymore. He was building a nervous system for things. And the venture capitalists didn't get it. But the engineers did. While they debated valuations, he worked 12-hour days. 15 when the circuits didn't behave. He coded in silence. Ate alone. Rewrote logic gates until the lights dimmed around him. Not to impress. To prove again that what he imagined could exist. Patent 4 went out at 2:48 a.m. on a Tuesday. He didn't check the confirmation email until Thursday. By then, he was already sketching number 5. Back home, the school still had his name listed under absent. No ceremony. No alumni spotlight. No apology. But he got emails. From kids who used to ignore him. They asked how he did it. How he got smart. He never replied. Not because he didn't want to. Because there was no shortcut. He hadn't gotten smart. He had gotten serious. One day, during a systems test, a former classmate visited the lab. It wasn't scheduled. He worked there now. Intern. QA support. Didn't recognize the name on the design until he saw it printed on a chip casing the size of a thumbnail. He stared at it for a long time, then looked across the lab at the hoodie bent over a table, soldering with hands steady from 1,000 hours of failure. He walked over. Didn't say sorry. Didn't say I was wrong. Just said, "Is that yours?" The inventor looked up once. Not with anger. Not with arrogance. Just a nod. Because by now the answer was obvious. Later that month, the 4th patent was approved. Noticed by an energy group in Europe. Then by a smart city startup in Seoul. Then by a logistics firm in the Bay. Everyone wanted a piece. He didn't license it. He asked a question. Will you build better cities with it? Only 2 companies said yes. Those were the ones he signed. The money came. Quietly. Brutally fast. He used part of it to buy his grandmother a house with working heat. Then funded a grant for kids with 0 connections and full notebooks. He named it Daydreamers. The application asked for no GPA. Just one thing. Show me what you can't stop thinking about. He never built a company logo. Never rented a penthouse. Never dressed the part. He still wore the hoodie, though now it was new, stitched clean, a quiet nod to the version of himself who built a future out of ridicule. People kept telling him to scale, to brand, to go public. But he wasn't interested in being the face of anything. He was building the spine of everything. Invisible systems, quiet revolutions. Ideas that moved through machines like water through circuits, unseen but essential. He did interviews reluctantly. When they asked how it felt to go from nobody to inventor, he always corrected them. I was never nobody. I was just working while you looked away. That line spread faster than his first design. Not because it sounded good. Because it was true. Years passed. His lab grew, not with fanfare, but with function. Young engineers came in waves. He taught them like blueprints, line by line, layer by layer. He told them to keep notebooks and ignore algorithms. He reminded them that failure was currency, not shame. He told them the story of the day someone kicked his sketches across a hallway and called him a loser. Then showed them the page they had stepped on, now framed. Annotated with the original claim number from the patent that changed everything. They didn't laugh. They stared like it was sacred. Eventually, schools began teaching his work. Not as history. As foundation. Design courses studied the curves of his cooling system. Environmental programs used his chip as case study. Every file, every diagram, every failed prototype open source. Not because he didn't value ownership, but because he had never built for profit. He built for the kid in the back. The one still sketching. Still silent. Still being told to focus. Still hearing, stop daydreaming. On his last day in the lab, the one he built from a shed, through patent filings, through sweat and solder, he walked to the back room alone. No ceremony. Just a bench. And a new kid at the table. She looked up nervously, showed him a drawing on the screen. Her design was crude. Raw. Full of holes. But it mattered. He smiled, gently pointed at a flaw in her layout and said, "You're not wrong. You're just early." He left without a goodbye. Because real builders don't need applause. Just room. And now? He had given them that room. A few weeks later, a janitor sweeping the hallway outside a school science fair paused at a poster tacked to a wall. It read, "From loser to inventor, the quiet rise of A. Ruiz." Below it, a small quote. "If they call it a daydream, don't wake up. Keep building."